Hi, everyone. Welcome to Microsoft Ignite, and thank you for joining us today. We are so happy to have you here with us. I'm Katerina Athanasiou, and I'm a product marketing manager for Microsoft Purview. And I'll be joined today with a few additional speakers, Caroline, Christophe, and Dan. Now, before we dive in, I want to ground us in a few emerging trends we're seeing among our customers. First, fragmentation is slowing teams down. Security decision makers agree that they prefer integrated solutions that enable better visibility into risks and reduce mean time to response. There's also a global cybersecurity workforce shortage. There are 4.7 million less professionals available than what's needed. And data security teams are feeling incredibly stretched. On average, they're reviewing just 58% of their daily alerts, a 5-point decrease from a year ago. The result? Short-staffed teams juggling multiple point solutions, fatigued by endless alerts on a daily basis. And that's just an average day. Now imagine you're dealing with an active incident that involves data. During this critical time, your CISO wants to know the answer to 3 critical questions. First, how is this data accessed and by whom? Pinpointing the source and containing the incident immediately is a top priority. Next, what data was accessed and how sensitive was it? What's the level of exposure? Identifying the specific information that was accessed or stolen and assessing your level of exposure is essential. And finally, what's the business impact? Understanding how this will affect your internal processes, customers, stakeholders, not to mention trust in your organization. So as we know, security is a team sport. SOC analysts and data security admins partner closely to investigate these incidents, and their approaches are different but complementary. SOC teams focus on breadth, understanding the full threat landscape and blast radius of an incident. Data security admins go deep, identifying which data is vulnerable and which users and activities are risky, both to prevent incidents and to respond to them. Bringing these teams closer together creates an integrated, layered security program that goes from reactive to proactive, covering alerts comprehensively and accelerating incident response. In Microsoft Defender XDR, you already have rich incident context, timelines, alert severity, and details about the affected device. Now, by adding Microsoft Purview's data security insights, SOC analysts gain an additional layer of visibility, the sensitivity of the data involved, how users interacted with it, and risky behaviors related to the incident. This combined context fills gaps in the timeline and helps prioritize incidents based not only on the value of the compromised data, but also on user risk. Over the past few years, we've built key integrations between Defender and Purview. Insider risk and data loss prevention alerts are surfaced in Defender incidents and advanced hunting. Remediation actions are not only informed by user context, but actionable directly in Defender. This year, we've added another layer, data security investigations, an AI-powered Purview solution that uncovers risks buried in data through deep content analysis. SOC analysts can now start a data security investigation directly from the incident pane in Defender. Now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague and friend, Caroline Lee, who's going to show you more about what this looks like in action.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Lee. I'm a product marketing manager in Microsoft Defender. Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully this is your last session before we all grab a drink. We're going to be showing you how Defender and Purview work together to bring together those signals across the entire investigation experience and accelerate response while still continuing to protect your data. All right, so let's walk through a real-life incident that we saw in Microsoft Defender XDR. Defender XDR is our extended detection and response solution that unifies signals across endpoints, identity, emails, SaaS apps, and of course, data security to detect, investigate, and respond to threats faster. We've seen such incredible impact by incorporating these signals from Microsoft Purview, and if we're lucky, maybe we'll even hear from one of our customers today. So this specific incident was a hands-on keyboard attack where an attacker attempted to move laterally from a device to cloud resources. We recognize the attacker behavior and actually have already disrupted this attack with automatic attack disruption, our built-in self-defense capability in Microsoft Defender. We can see that disruption has already gone and disabled the user and the OAuth app that had permissions to access other applications. Right now, there is no indication that that app had access to critical assets that could potentially be compromised. However, if we expand the attack paths from the disabled OAuth application, we'll be able to see the potential paths the attacker could take next to relaunch their campaign. And these paths come directly from exposure management. In the expanded attack, we can see that this specific OAuth application has paths that lead to multiple applications that contain critical assets, specifically SharePoint, OneDrive, and Power Automate. To get ahead of the attacker and better understand what actual sensitive data is at risk, we'll create a DSI, or Data Security Investigation, case right from the incident graph, specifically for the SharePoint site that was marked as a critical asset. The DSI will contain all of that rich context that you get from Microsoft Defender, the correlation details, the activity leading up to the incident, and package it all up for our data security admin, Christophe, to further investigate. So Christophe, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for attending this session. My name is Christophe Fiessinger. I'm a Purview squad leader on the Purview engineering team, and it's definitely a pleasure to talk about DSI for the first time at Ignite. Now, again, as Katerina mentioned, Data Security Investigations, or DSI, is a solution that just went in public preview in April of this year, and we're marching towards releasing it towards the end of the year. Now, in the next few screens, I'll be performing that investigation that my colleague Caroline asked me to perform. Now, a couple of things before I get started. Again, DSI is a Purview solution. You can see it on the left nav. And basically, data security investigation gives you three key value pillars. It helps you identify that potential data security risk, whether initiated from XDR, but we can also initiate an investigation from insider risk management. There'll be a theater session on Thursday if you're interested. You can definitely start from what we call the DSI front door. If someone's called your internal team and say maybe this person is risky or this content is risky. And also I'll show you the fourth integrations, which is data security posture management. Now, three pillars. One is to help identify the content. The second value pillar of DSI is to analyze that content and at AI speed, AI scale, look for those needles in a haystack that could potentially put your organization at risk. And obviously the third pillar is once you do have a risk, it's all about mitigating it ASAP. So here in this case, it assumes that I've got the proper role on our back to go from XDR to DSI, but we have a very dedicated role-based access, and in this case, I get access, so I simply navigate it from XDR to DSI. Now let's review that query that got passed from XDR. So I click on the refine options, and here you can see on the left, I got a SharePoint site, and I've got a query. Now I could further refine this, I could change the parameters, maybe I can add more data. But again, the goal here is my colleague Caroline asked me to look at all that content. I'm not going to remove anything and look at the totality of that SharePoint sites and hunt for risks. So next, I'll just click simply on the Add to Scope button. And what this does, it's going to grab the content from that SharePoint site that Caroline flagged, and it's going to pull it into an investigations. Now from there on, I'm switching to that second value pillar of DSI, which is the Analysis tab. And again, here we're offering you a set of tools to slice and dice the data. Now the intent that I forgot to mention in the intro is here, the one risk I'm really looking for ASAP is things like credentials, passwords, tokens, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that? Because if an attacker would have got a hold of that information, that would have given a recurring entry point in my tenant and continue to exfiltrate potential data. So here, I'm simply going to type something that looks like a very natural language query. And by the way, I want to call out, I've got about 4,000 files in this investigation that came across that SharePoint site. So I'm going to simply type, tell me about what type of credentials are most commonly represented in this data sets. And it takes a few seconds or a few minutes, depending on the volume of the data sets. And voila. In seconds, I've got an assessment of that data sets. And again, I was hunting for very specific data security risk. And here it's made an assessment of this data set for those risks. And it confirms my fears. That data set contains passwords, tokens, credentials, and more. I could, it's a very detailed summary of that investigation. I could further download that assessment and pass that on to my peers if I want to share that internally. Now, you might be asking, how did we get to those assessments in seconds? Well, the first thing we did with that data set is we run large language models to do what we call embeddings. What does embeddings mean in plain English? Well, it's all about looking at intent between not just the words, but the content, the sentences in those files. And typically, a good explanation is it gives basically a representation of each intent sentences in that document, and then think of it as like a GPS map of those intent. And the simplest example I typically give, if I had a document with the word cat and another document with the word dog, and dog could have been in French, Spanish, Korean, whatever, and I would have queried the word animals, well, that's what vector search is. It finds similar meanings. A cat and dog are considered animals, and therefore that could be of interest during my investigations. And then the third thing we did with that content, we didn't stop at the content contained in the files. We also look at the metadata in the files. So I could have tweaked that query to say, look at credentials, let's say, in PowerPoint documents, or maybe that got shared externally over emails. That's the power of those natural language query you can do with this data set. Now, next, again, it confirmed my fears that it does have sensitive information. I want to mitigate that as soon as possible. So next, what I'm going to do is, before I do that, I can show you, you can also do the same analysis file by file. So in this case, I pick the highest relevant score file, and again, I get that AI summary. So by file, it confirms my fears that it contains risky information. Now, instead of looking at all those files, in this case, I get 30 that match that high severity pattern. I want to look at all those files in aggregate in a batch, and I want to do credential extraction. So again, I can pass that on potentially to my Entra administrators to, let's say, rotate those reset those passwords or rotate those tokens. So what I do is I select all the files, both select, and I'm going to click examine. So you'll see throughout the next few minutes in this presentation, we give you a tool set. I'm going to click on examine in this demo. Later on, you'll see how I can leverage the categorization options, which is the next button on this toolbar. So I click examine. And what we do is we grab all those files. We give you an assessment. We got 30 files, 19 meg, but it could have been 600 files or 1,000 files for a gigabyte of data. And then we give you three options: credentials, risk, and mitigation. Again, in this case, I want to move very fast to remove any credentials contained in that SharePoint site, just to be ahead of that attacker. So I'll select the first options. And then I give it a name and a descriptions, and just click examine. Now, what happens after that, a batch job gets kicked off. Again, depending on the volume of data, it might take a few minutes or a few hours. But then it comes back with an assessment, file by file, of did it find any credential? If so, tell me more information about each. So you can see the first column is the actual credentials it detected. Now, obviously, I cheated a little bit. I stuffed quite a bit of credentials in a few files just to highlight things. And then the next thing we do is we show you the credential type. And then scrolling to the right, that assessment also gives you surrounding snippet and thought process. Again, for every file, what we did under the hood is we round trip to generative AI to get an assessment for that risk pattern I was looking for. So this is as accurate as possible with the latest tech stack. Now, again, the goal with surrounding snippet and thought process, similar to what we discussed in the keynote this morning, it's all about observability. It's to give you the confidence that I was hunting for credentials, and clearly the Gen AI, you know, they didn't hallucinate. Those are true positive versus false positive. So that's why we give you all that information. Again, in this view, this summary, if you like, I can export that data, and I could have shared that, let's say, with my Entra admin if I want to reset those passwords or rotate the tokens. Or I could simply click on the next button, which is Add Selected Files to Mitigation Plan. And this is going to lead to the third pillar of DSI, which is leveraging we provide a native workflow to help you mitigate those confirmed risks. And you can see here, I got all those files that I've seen. Now I could go further and provide individual status, whatever my processes is. Or as you'll see in the future, we continue to innovate on that front, and potentially we'll give you the ability to purge those files. So right there, as the data security admin, I see something that shouldn't be in SharePoint that's highly risky. Let me purge it so that in case someone gets a hold of the, gets access to that SharePoint, there's no risky file for them to look at. Now, I'm not quite done yet. The investigation, you know, I know we're Tuesday afternoon, 5 p.m. Maybe the investigation got kicked off on Monday. Maybe it got kicked off Tuesday at 9 a.m. Guess what? I know the attacker probably didn't sit still. So I need to find what happened with those files in real time since I've completed my assessment and confirmed those credentials. So to do so, I go back to the Analysis tab, and again, there's one more options whether we provide, which is this button called Explore Insights. So again, I can select a few files, all the files in this view regardless, and then I'm going to click Explore Insights. And again, the goal is I need to find out who else viewed those files since I already confirmed that those files contain credentials. So I click on Explore Insights, and voila. Thanks to Microsoft Sentinel and the data risk graph, we're painting a picture of all the activities around those files. So let me take a few seconds and explain what you're looking at. On the left, in this case, I got one file, but it could be multiple files, but it's one file with activity. In the middle, you're seeing all the users, aka all my employees that look at that file. Now, activity could be viewed. It could be read an email if it was an email. In this case, it's a SharePoint file. So it could be viewed, download, deleted, rename, blah, 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 blah. All the SharePoint activities that you've got, you know, that's in your activity logs. We're painting that picture. And then the next thing you're looking at, so for each of the users, we get the logging activity. And then there's another layer that we put on is those users, my employees, where did they log in from? Did they log in within my corporate infrastructure? Did they log in with a sanctioned machine that I give them via VPN? Or no, did they log in from a risky IP address? And that's what you're seeing here. Thanks to the integration with our threat intelligence, we're flagging IP addresses that are potentially risky. Why is that important? Because maybe that signifies that those 3 users, maybe their account got breached. They shouldn't be logging from those IP addresses. We're supposed to be here in the office, or maybe we're supposed to be on vacation. Why are they viewing that sensitive file that contains credentials and passwords? So again, to recap, what we did thanks to the integration, the native integration with Microsoft Sentinel, and by the way, we announced the public preview in September, and today the integrations is GA. So again, what we did, just to recap this view, we stitched together all the Microsoft 365 user activity with the Entra logging activities, and then we threw in the Microsoft Threat Intelligence to paint which IP are risky versus the one that are not risky. Why is that important? Because as investigators, I thought I was done identifying risky files. Well, guess what? This helps me uncover hidden risk. Again, maybe I should look at those 3 users, whether they explicitly look at that file or it's someone impersonating them, or maybe they get a hold of their account to look at those files. Either way, I probably need to investigate each one of them and see what else have they looked at, whatever files have they touched, viewed, deleted, forwarded, et cetera, et cetera. So to summarize this first demo, we showed you with Caroline how the native integration between Defender XDR, Purview DSI, and then you layer on Microsoft Sentinel helps you deal with a data security incident at scale. Now let's switch gear a little bit. We've showed you that story, how it started as alert that guided to an incident in XDR, and we got ahead of the attacker and look at potentially risky content lying in my tenant. Now to switch gear, let me show you how potentially you can be proactive in that investigation and hunt for risk before it's too late. And happy to introduce today at Ignite the native integration with DSI and data security posture management. So let me show you that in action. What you're looking at is the new data security posture management, or DSPM portal within Microsoft Purview. Now, there's a whole session tomorrow on this topic. There's also a full-blown blog post about this. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on DSPM. But if you want to learn more, definitely encourage all of you to attend those sessions, read the blog post, and more. So Katerina will show you slides with all the other related content, and specifically related to DSPM. So just to orient you a little bit, again, DSPM is all about giving you very actionable insights on your corpus of information, whether it's generative AI, whether it's Agent 365, whether it's Security Copilot, whether it's productivity files that users are using every day to get work done. And we'll give you a set of actions. So we're removing the guesswork for you to guess where is my risk in my organization based on very specific objectives. So here I can click on objective within the DSPM, and basically there's 3 objectives that will ship out of the box that are rolling out this week. First one is to prevent data exposure from generative AI. The second one is to prevent oversharing of sensitive data. And the third objective is the one I'll cover today, which is prevent exfiltration to risky destinations. So again, we give you a dedicated page where you have an objectives. You can track that over time, and you can see how is my tenant doing against that objective if this is something I care about that's top of mind. Scrolling down, we give you a lot of metrics against that exfiltration's objectives. And one of the new metric is not so much did data leave my tenant, but does the data contain sensitive files? Does the data that got exfiltrated contain risky content? And that's that insights that I'm happy to introduce here at Ignite, which is that native integration between DSI and DSPM. So here we're showing 406 megs of data get exfiltrated, and that data seems risky. So let's look at that data that potentially get exfiltrated. So I can click on Create Investigations, and similar to the screen that Caroline used when she started investigation from XDR, I can give it a name. And then the one thing I want to call out is the third entry here, which is additional context for AI. This is super important because basically it's telling the intent of what you're looking for in terms of risk. It's similar if you've attended any agentic session this week, you're probably seeing that same pattern. You need to tell the agent a little more about what you're looking versus a blank sheet of paper. So in this case, I'm looking for confidential information and sensitive customer information. So again, this is a little departure from the first scenario where I was looking for passwords and credentials. So I click on Create Investigations. And the next thing, again, similar to the prior demo, you're taken to the DSI investigation page for that investigation you just created. Now, let me spend a little bit of time this time on the options that we give you to start the investigation. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I can start an investigation from XDR, responding to an incident. I can now start it from DSPM, but I could have started from the DSI front door. And you're getting a glimpse here of potentially what you can do. In this case, because we're looking at employees that exfiltrated data, you're seeing on the left-hand side that I've got under data sources a lot of my employees. In this case, I got 6 users from this demo tenant. I also have a SharePoint site. And again, you're seeing a similar pattern on the right. I've got a query. I get a date range. Typically, this is 30 days. In this case, a little longer. But I could refine that if I wanted to. Now, this is not the only options where you can start investigation. The other thing that I will not cover today, I could have started from audit log. If I've got a suspicious employees that maybe is about to leave or maybe left the company, maybe I want to look at this person potentially forwarded some sensitive emails to their personal account. So I'm not going to do that today. The next step you can do when you start an investigation is you can get a glimpse of how much data we're talking about. Is it petabytes of data? Is it millions of files? Is it 4,000? Is it 400,000? And that's what that review estimates can do. I can simply click that, and before I commit the data to an investigation, I get a beautiful pie chart of all the sources and potentially how many files that we're talking about. And again, that gives me the ability as a data security investigators to maybe change the query, add data if I miss some, or reduce the data, maybe change the date range if I want to move a little faster and reduce my data set. Now in this case, I'm not going to modify the query. I'll go add to scope. Again, add to scope commits the data from those different data sources, whether it's a user OneDrive, a mailbox, team chat, Copilot interactions, SharePoint, OneDrive, yada, 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 and adds that to investigations. So here we give you one more options to further refine the data sets. And you can see here, we'll get back to that. I've got different files in different languages, PowerPoint, Word documents, and more. And you can see on the left-hand side, I got a rich set of filters. And potentially, this is an opportunity to say, hey, maybe I want to filter all the files from enron.com. So I was playing with the publicly available Enron data set, and that's one thing you can do. But you can filter by users, by file types, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, I'm not going to filter any of that data. I'm going to simply, again, click Prepare Data. And again, what this does, it gives me a confirmations, and I hit Prepare. And again, it takes a few minutes or longer, depending on the volume of data. And what it does is it runs, again, that large language models to do embeddings, to find the relationship in terms of intent in that data sets. And that's really the cornerstone to then go further down the road and do further AI analysis. Now, in this case, I'm not quite sure what I'm looking for. I know I'm looking for confidential information, but it's not as clear as passwords or credentials. So in this time, in my vector search query, I'm just going to type, give me confidential information or sensitive customer information. And I'm just going to click Submit in my vector search. And then it's going to, in this case, it listed 2,054 items. It's on to the right of the screen. And again, humanly, I still don't have time to look at that information. So next, I'm going to leverage the second tool at your arsenal to do AI analysis, which is the categorize options. Before I do that, I want to spend a few minutes again and call out, a little hard to see, but the very first file that actually matched the pattern I was looking for says Microsoft 365 chat. Again, what I want to stress is DSI can analyze any text. It doesn't matter if it's source code, JSON, Copilot prompt, Copilot responses, whether it's M365 Copilot, Security Copilot, whether it's your own built Gen AI, or whether it's Agent 365 that we announced today, we can analyze that content. And like I mentioned, you're looking at the second file as a JSON file, but we can also analyze, obviously, Teams chat, Teams channel interactions, and obviously all the usual Office files contained in Microsoft 365. Now, again, the goal here is I'm not quite sure what are those patterns that potentially get exfiltrated. So let me introduce the categorize option. So I click on that button. And again, the goal of categorization is I need to get a glimpse of what are the buckets of data that potentially get exfiltrated. And again, I need to do that at AI scale. So there's basically three options we give you natively in DSI. You can categorize data using our default categories, and I'll get back to that. You can use AI-generated categories, or you can use your own custom categories. So let's look at each option. Default categories, we got 13 of those out of the box that we shipped in public preview, anything from business information to credentials to intellectual property and more. I'm not going to select any of these. And I open that AI suggested categories, and you might say, Christophe, how does it know that maybe I'm interested in confidential, proprietary, private, restricted, yada, yada, yada? Guess what? That prompt I just did with vector search, it already understands, hey, Christophe is looking for that specific pattern. So maybe I'm going to auto-suggest to Christophe to organize that data set using those different categories. That's what we mean by AI suggested categories. So in this case, I'm not going to select all. I'll select a few that are definitely of interest: confidential, proprietary, non-public, and internal use only. But wait, there's more. I also know that at Contoso, or I should say at 𝗲𝗲𝗲, I've got a very top secret project called Obsidian. So in this case, whether you're in manufacturing, healthcare, banking, I'm sure all of you have secret projects or secret ingredients or secret something that you care a lot about. So in this case, I'm going to simply enter Obsidian, and then it's a little cropped here. I'm just going to simply click on that categorize button. And a few minutes later, or longer, depending on the data set, voila. I got that data set organized in those 5 different categories, 4 AI suggested on the custom. And right away, we paint a different risk level with those categories. In this case, it just happens that they're all high risk, hence in red. And for each categories, you can start getting more information. So in this case, I'll go straight to the Obsidian categories, which is again that top secret project. And I know it's a little hard to see, but let me read that because it's important. The investigation highlights multiple incidents of confidential information exposure, yada, yada, yada. So a very verbose assessment. But again, it confirms my fears that that secret project, unfortunately, left my tenant. And guess what? We also give you more information. I can go to the left, expand that category, and then within a category, we organize files in terms of themes, or what we call topics. In this case, the very first topic reiterates that fear that, acquisition of Obsidian, confidential, strategic, financial information. If you look to the right, the topic description actually shares dollar values, and it also gives me a sample document that matches that pattern, and so forth. Now, for each topic, there's a score, and then in this case, matching that topic, I get 14 files. So I could go and look at topic by topic, or I can simply next select the entire Obsidian categories, and then click on examine again. Now, one thing I want to call out, notice how I've got different files in different languages. So I click examine. In this case, I'm not doing credential extractions. I want to get a mitigation assessment thanks to generative AI. So I click that, click examine, and then I can recall that results by clicking on the view details, and voila. In this case, again, we're not looking at credentials. It's all about how do I mitigate those sensitive files that unfortunately left my tenant. Now, notice the first file, again, is a Copilot prompt. And again, that was risky. It looks like the user was trying to use Copilot to get access to that confidential information. But let me talk about the second file. You're probably wondering, and the second file, a little hard to read, but it says the document reveals confidential details about alpha strategic acquisitions. It talks about a 250 million euros acquisition. Again, this is super sensitive. So I'm going to click on that file. You might be wondering, Christophe, what is this? Well, this is a file in Greek. I do not speak Greek, but I highlighted in red. Basically, what this means in plain English is this is confidentials, do not share, internal only. So what's the magic here? I prompted in English and a reason a Greek file. It could have been in Korean, it could have been in Mandarin, it could have been in Japanese, it could have been in German. Or I could have prompted in my native French language, and I would have reasoned over an English document, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the beauty. Whatever is your language preference, you prompt, and it will reason over multiple languages and give the results in my native language. So to go back to, again, I've identified a set of risky files. I need to get what should I do with those risky files. And again, that's what we're showing you here. Scrolling to the right, for each file, we give you what you should do, what's the thought process, and then what are the risk implications for each of those files that got leaked externally. Now, I'm not going to read all the text. Again, I could export that data if I wanted to, or I could simply commit all those files to my mitigation plan. And again, it rendezvous with what I was showing earlier. I can leverage the out-of-the-box workflow from Microsoft DSI. Now, in summary, in this second demo, I showed you how you can proactively hunt for risk, confirm the risk, and mitigate it before it's too late. Now, enough product demo about DSI. Let's bring on stage Katerina to hear firsthand about the customers that have been using DSI since public preview.
Thank you. Christophe and his team have been working hard on all of these amazing integrations and new features and enhancements that you just saw, so thank you so much. Now, as we mentioned before, data security investigations went into public preview in April. And since then, we have heard a lot of awesome customer feedback about this product. And today, we are lucky enough to be joined by one of those customers. So I want to invite to the stage Dan Gorecki of Toyota Motor North America. Thanks for joining us. So Dan, can you just introduce yourself to the crowd?
Certainly. My name's Dan Gorecki. I'm a senior principal engineer at Toyota Motor North America. We're a leading manufacturer of automobiles. I believe you've probably seen some of our products out on the street.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start off by telling us a bit about your experience with Microsoft security products?
Oh, happily. I've worked with Microsoft's entire suite of security products. Previously, I triaged and investigated security risks and coordinated incident response using Defender XDR. And more recently, I've been managing insider risk management and data loss prevention, as well as using data security investigations to identify where our sensitive data is and whether or not it's at risk.
Well, I love to hear you're using our whole stack. Can you tell me a bit more about what brought you to data security investigations?
Certainly. We had a use case. We needed to identify any plain text passwords that were in SharePoint, and we didn't have DSI at the time. I started out with scripting. We tried some custom search, but it just wasn't scalable. It wasn't consistent, and we weren't getting good results. Fortunately, around that time, Data Security Investigations was released. We were able to get it into our tenant, and I began working with it. And I was able to quickly solve my problem with this use case. I was able to get actionable information and identify a potential risk.
Wow, I love to hear about a proactive use case for DSI. That's great. Now, we've also, well, before I get to this next question, tell me, how has DSI changed how you work and how your team operates?
Well, we're more proactive in looking for our sensitive data. We have easier tools to be able to identify and trace that data. It's really become a strong part of our investigative process.
Great. And we recently launched an integration with Microsoft Sentinel Graph with the data risk graph. Have you had a chance to use that?
Absolutely. I'm blown away by data risk graph. I think the ability to have a clear, concise picture that your analysts and your SOC workers can look at and then make decisions that they can be actionable, I think that's huge. As well as adding in the vulnerability and threat data to give your analysts another route to go down to look further in if there's something more being shown up on the screen.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the data risk graph, just the ability to find a missing node in an investigation and then letting you investigate that further. Now, before we wrap up, what advice do you have to share with your fellow practitioners?
Well, two things. First off, take the time and really learn the tool. There's a lot of moving parts and it does some really cool things, and it's kind of a Swiss Army knife in some ways. But it's really easy sometimes to find one or two use cases and go down that rabbit hole and then forget about everything else. So take the time, get to know it, and really look at the features. And the second one is scoping. It's so important, especially with large volumes of data that you're going to be working with. Get clear, concise scoping. You want to give the tool as much information as you can so that it can do the right job that you want it to do.
Wow, well, thank you so much for sharing your experience, Dan. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. All right, folks, let's recap. So today we opened talking about the challenges our data security and SOC teams experience and the top questions CISOs ask during an active incident. Giving the SOC and data security teams the context they need is essential to doing their jobs successfully. Over the last several years, we've brought data loss prevention and insider risk management signals into Defender. And now, as we've covered very thoroughly, we have added one more layer to that with data security investigations and the ability, again, to launch that from the incident queue. And we are just getting started. We will continue building and empowering your teams to keep your data and your organization safe. Thank you so much for joining us today. Be sure to check out the many breakout and theater sessions across Purview and Defender. We've got lots of great product news, demos to share. And if you want to talk to the people behind the products, make sure you take a trip to the Security Expert Meetup. Get a demo, get your questions answered by the people that are building these products. And last but not least, don't forget to read our blogs, which detail what's new in Defender and Purview. And of course, get started and try the products themselves. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you had a great first day at Ignite.
Thank you for joining us at Microsoft Ignite's silent stages. Please leave your headset at your seat as you exit. Thank you for your cooperation.